The gold standard has played a significant role in global economic history. In the previous video, we covered its origins, adoption, and advantages. Today I'm going to explore its impact on the global economy during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mostly discussing its challenges and the criticisms that eventually gave way to the modern monetary system we have today. The gold standard was ultimately replaced by a new system, the Bretton Woods system, which has also become a part of economic history more than 50 years ago. Although I recommend watching the first part for a more comprehensive understanding, this video can also be enjoyed on its own. But before we dive in, let's take a moment just to clarify what the term the gold standard means. Simply put, it refers to a monetary system where a country's currency is backed by a fixed amount of gold, which means that the government guarantees to exchange its currency for gold at a fixed price. This system has been in use in various forms throughout history, but the one we'll be focusing on is the classical gold standard, which was in place from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So, let's get started, and don't forget to subscribe to Economic Rhapsody for more. So, the gold standard was a dominant monetary system in the global economy for decades, thanks to its numerous advantages. Just before we get into the disadvantages and the decline of that system, let's quickly review its advantages. Advantage number 1, it provided price stability by limiting the money supply and preventing inflation from spiraling out of control. This meant that people could rely on the value of their money to remain relatively stable over time. Number 2, it promoted international trade by maintaining stable exchange rates between countries, which made it easier for businesses to conduct cross-border transactions. Number 3, the gold standard created confidence in the monetary system because the value of money was backed by a tangible asset. Number 4, it promoted fiscal discipline by preventing governments from simply printing money to fund their spending. And the last advantage, the gold standard provided a stable environment for investment by limiting currency fluctuations and encouraging long-term investment. Overall, these advantages helped to establish the gold standard as a key player in the global economy for many years. Now, let's take a brief look at how the gold standard worked in practice. Under this system, anyone holding paper money could exchange it for a fixed amount of gold at their country's central bank. This process, known as gold convertibility, provided a sense of security and trust in the currency. Central banks held reserves of gold, and their primary responsibility was to manage the supply of gold and currency in the economy to ensure that the exchange rate remained stable. In times of economic growth, central banks could increase the money supply by purchasing gold from the public and injecting it into the economy. This would lower interest rates and stimulate borrowing and spending, leading to increased economic activity. But the gold standard is history for almost 100 years. In today's monetary system, most countries operate on a fiat currency system. Nope, not the car. Let's take a pause for a sec to clarify this term. The term fiat is not an acronym as you'd expect it. It comes from a Latin word that means, let it be done. You probably hear this term quite often since the rise of cryptocurrencies. The term fiat refers to a currency that has value because a government or central authority has declared it to be legal tender, rather than being backed by a physical commodity like gold. The value of fiat currency is based on the trust and confidence people have in the issuing authority and its ability to maintain stability and control over the money supply. In a fiat currency system, central banks have the power to adjust interest rates, regulate the money supply, and implement monetary policy to achieve economic objectives. Today, central banks monitor key economic indicators and can adjust interest rates, print money, or use open market operations to influence the money supply. Unlike the gold standard, the value of money is determined by market forces such as supply and demand, and the actions of central banks and other economic factors. While the gold standard provided stability and confidence in the monetary system, the current monetary system provides flexibility for central banks to manage the economy and respond to changing economic conditions. So while the gold standard may have been a key player in the global economy in the past, the current monetary system has become the standard for most countries today. Now, let's delve into the challenges and criticisms of the gold standard. While it had its perceived advantages, this monetary system also faced limitations in managing economic crises, responding to changes in demand for money, and promoting domestic economic growth. So as we said, during times of economic contraction or inflationary pressures, central banks would sell gold to the public and reduce the money supply. This would raise interest rates, discourage borrowing and spending, and help curb inflation. Same as in our days when central banks sell bonds to the public in order to reduce the money supply to achieve the same macroeconomic results. However, the stability of the gold standard was highly dependent on the availability of gold, unlike bonds that can be easily printed, or more accurately, digitally generated online. So if the supply of gold increased rapidly due to new discoveries or mining, it could lead to inflationary pressures as more money was injected into the economy, while the problem was that this money wasn't an outcome of a physical commodity, production of services or goods, or significant technology development. And why is that so problematic? For example, during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments around the world were dropping money from helicopters to support businesses and households. While this action helped to address the immediate crisis, it was followed by a quite predictable side effect: the current inflation that we are having today. This side effect caused the most severe inflation in the last 4 decades. Of course, this wasn't the only reason, but probably the main one. The inverse problem was a decrease in the supply of gold, which could lead to deflationary pressures as the money supply contracted. These fluctuations in the supply of gold could pose challenges for central banks in managing the gold standard and implementing effective monetary policies. It required careful management and coordination to maintain stability and prevent economic imbalances. A famous example would be the Great Deflation of the late 19th century. Of course, I promised to dedicate a full episode to this enchanted story. Gold to silver, when falling prices paralyzed the economy. Those scenarios could pose challenges in maintaining price stability and managing the overall health of the economy. Furthermore, critics argued that the gold standard could hinder domestic economic growth. With the supply of money tied to the availability of gold, it was argued that this could limit the ability of governments to stimulate their economies during periods of sluggish growth. This could potentially result in prolonged economic downturns and hinder the ability of countries to promote domestic economic prosperity. Historical examples of countries that faced difficulties with the gold standard further highlight these challenges. For instance, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, many countries struggled to respond effectively to the economic crisis due to the limitations of the gold standard. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States for almost the whole crisis period and was a well-known opponent of the gold standard, said,
"The international gold standard is a wholly unnecessary device, resting partly on accident and partly on superstition."
He was quoting John Keynes, one of the greatest economists of the early 20th century, who was also a great opponent of the gold standard. The rigid gold convertibility and inability to adjust the money supply to meet the changing economic conditions were cited as contributing factors to the severity and duration of the economic downturn. These challenges and criticisms of the gold standard are important to consider when evaluating its effectiveness as a monetary system. As we can see, while it had its advantages, it also faced limitations and challenges. Over time, the gold standard system faced challenges and criticisms, eventually leading to its decline and eventual abandonment as a global monetary standard. The reasons for the decline of the gold standard were multifaceted. Major events such as World War I and the Great Depression had a significant impact on the collapse of the gold standard. The immense costs of war and the need for increased government spending during World War I led to inflationary pressures and a strain on the gold reserves of many countries. In order to finance the war, governments had to abandon the strict gold convertibility and print more money, resulting in a departure from the gold standard. I invite you to watch my series about Germany's hyperinflation to learn more about this. The Great Depression, which followed in the 1930s, further destabilized the gold standard. The economic downturn led to deflationary pressures, and countries faced challenges in maintaining price stability and managing their economies within the constraints of the gold standard. And the outcomes? Many countries abandoned the gold standard to implement alternative monetary policies to address the economic crisis. In 1944, towards the end of World War II, an international conference was held in a New Hampshire town called Bretton Woods, with worldwide representatives from 44 countries in attendance. It was during this conference that the new monetary system, the Bretton Woods, was adopted. Under this system, the value of currencies was pegged to the US dollar, which in turn was pegged to gold. The Bretton Woods system played a vital role in promoting international trade and investment, as it provided stability and predictability in currency exchange rates. The Bretton Woods system was maintained for several decades, but the US, as the dominant economy, faced mounting pressure to maintain the gold standard. This required the US to maintain a fixed rate of exchange between the US dollar and gold, even as the US balance of payments deficit grew larger due to military and domestic spending. As a result, the US began printing more dollars, which made it increasingly difficult to maintain the fixed exchange rate. In 1971, the US government, under the leadership of President Richard Nixon, announced that it would no longer exchange US dollars for gold, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system. This marked the end of the international gold standard and the beginning of the era of fiat money. Speaking of Nixon, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on my episode about the Watergate scandal, one of the most significant political corruption scandals in history. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system had far-reaching implications for the global economy, as it fundamentally changed the way that currencies were valued and exchanged. The move away from the gold standard allowed for greater flexibility in monetary policy and exchange rates, but it also brought new challenges and risks to the international financial system. The legacy of the gold standard is still debated among economists and policymakers today. While it is no longer in use as a global monetary system, its historical significance and relevance in modern economic discussions cannot be denied. Proponents argue that the gold standard provided a stable anchor for currencies, promoted price stability, and facilitated international trade. They believe that the discipline of a fixed exchange rate system, backed by gold, can help prevent inflation and promote long-term economic stability. However, critics of the gold standard argued that its limitations, such as its inability to effectively respond to changes in demand for money, manage economic crises, and promote domestic economic growth, ultimately led to its decline. They point out that the inflexibility of the gold standard and its reliance on a finite supply of gold may not be suitable for modern economies that require flexibility and adaptability in monetary policy. In conclusion, the gold standard played a significant role in global economic history, but it eventually faced challenges and criticisms that led to its decline as a global monetary system. The impact of major events such as World War I and the Great Depression, as well as their legacy and relevance in modern economic discussions, continue to be topics of debate among economists and policymakers. As we reflect on the historical significance of the gold standard, we can learn valuable lessons about the complexities of monetary systems, the challenges they face, and the evolving nature of economic policies. It is a reminder that no monetary system is perfect and requires careful management to ensure stability and growth. Thanks for watching Economic Rhapsody. I hope you learned some new things about monetary systems in general and about the gold standard specifically. Please don't forget to subscribe to get notified about the next economic event that I'm going to explore here. Feel free to comment with facts fixing, theories, suggestions, and ideas for the next economical events you'd like me to explore with you. And the last thing, please subscribe, like, and share to support the channel, and I promise to provide you with many more fascinating explorations of economic events from history. Talk to you soon.